Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and it's really that point I want to nail down here. What you're going to see today, we're not even at the peak. Things are going to get worse here. How do I know? Well, because the through line's pretty obvious once we get through all this. And for those of you that know what this video is going to be all about, which I assume is most of you if you've been on Twitter today, because, well, it's all most people have been talking about, we're actually going to go to 2 months ago before I start talking about what happened yesterday. So, pro-Palestine protester self-immolates outside Atlanta's Israeli consulate, and as you can see, this was from 2 months ago. In fact, it was on the 1st of December of last year. The person, who is as yet not been identified, is in critical condition, and a guard who attempted to intervene was injured. And in fact, I looked into this even further myself and could not find a name here. I can only imagine you can't find a name because there is not an active online profile, and I don't think people want to make a martyr out of this guy, though he's not actually dead from what I understand. But they certainly probably didn't want copycats, which is probably why you didn't really hear about this story, but obviously the more recent story was hard to avoid. And that's what we're going to get into now, because there really isn't that much more to this story than just pro-Palestine protester set self on fire in Atlanta. That's pretty much all the information you can get from the first one, and as I say, I think that was to suppress the story, but unfortunately, this more recent one the media found quite hard to suppress, given that the guy live streamed it. US Airman Aaron Bushnell's last Facebook post before setting himself on fire outside Israeli embassy. US Air Force engineer Aaron Bushnell left a last Facebook message before he set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy and died in protest. Which, I'm not going to play the video because it's nothing short of grim, and also YouTube won't let me do it. But yes, the man literally just walks out, sets himself on fire while shouting "Free Palestine," so it's pretty obvious what this guy wanted. Investigators have revealed that the man who set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy left a last Facebook post and a video describing his motives. In a video and various posts, Aaron Bushnell cited US support for Israel as the reason he set himself on fire and died in front of the Washington, D.C. building. The US has been criticised for their support for Israel after Hamas brutally attacked the country on October 7, prompting an intense war in Gaza, which so far has killed over 28,000 Palestinians, according to Hamas's Gaza Health Ministry, which doesn't differentiate between civilians and combatants, and 1,410 Israelis. And the thing with the Israeli one is that is Israeli combatants as far as I'm aware. But yes, from Gaza's health ministry, it's hard to tell if that's 28,000 soldiers, 28,000 civilians, or a mixture of both. We don't really know because they are just a propaganda unit. Earlier in the day, he wrote a Facebook post that has since been removed. He wrote, "Many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is, you're doing it, right now." Which I suppose is the post of a man with all his mental faculties in place. Then Bushnell posted another video before he went out to perform the spectacle, explaining what he was about to do and why. "My name is Aaron Bushnell, I am an active duty member of the US Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide," he says. "I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonisers, it is not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal." He started to livestream his act of self-immolation on Twitch, a popular video streaming website. While the video had been taken off Twitch, police have revealed the contents. And as I say, he walks in front of the embassy, pours liquid on himself, sets himself on fire, shouts "Free Palestine," and then just collapses. It is quite grim. It's not a nice way to go out, burning to death. One of the worst, in fact, but obviously this man was trying to emulate the Vietnamese Buddhist monk self-immolating to protest the South Vietnamese government's persecution of Buddhists, and that's it. That's what he was trying to emulate. But this one's a lot more cringe because an actual Buddhist monk self-immolating for Buddhist rights, let's say, is a lot more meaningful than some 20-odd-year-old burning himself for a bunch of Palestinians across the planet. Again, I made this point on Twitter, but effectively when it comes to Westerners, we have had more people to burning themselves, only one of them to death, but burning themselves to a critical condition, or worse, than we have actually had Westerners going over to fight for Palestine, despite the fact we see literally thousands of them out in every country, well, mainly the UK and the US, shouting free, free Palestine, Intifada, and all these other things that mean Israel, lay down your arms, we want Hamas to win. Because frankly, we live in an age of virtue signaling where people... This guy was in the Air Force as well, so he wouldn't be a stranger to understanding how war works. But we live in a world of pure virtue signaling, and not actually people seeing virtue in the way they act or what they do. So instead of doing anything productive or useful to society that is seen as a virtue, these virtues are only seen in your own opinions and what you do to signal these opinions. And what that's meant is that in an age where mental illness is clearly getting worse and worse, we are seeing people effectively go out in a spectacular way about an issue that doesn't affect him at all, and his answer to this is, I'm going to burn myself in front of an embassy rather than go over and join Hamas, because effectively we are in the age of weak men. You know, we had George Orwell and many other people from Britain go over to Spain to fight for the Spanish Republicans because they believed fascism was terrible and that, oh, these Republicans are socialists, they'll be better. They got disillusioned pretty much instantly when they saw nuns getting burned alive. But that's besides the point. We actually saw people leaving Britain to actually fight for what they believe in rather than just staying at home and saying, you know what, I believe in this socialist republic in Spain. Go ahead, lads. Anyway, luckily we have journalists like Andy No in the world, who did some investigating into Aaron Bushnell's background and people he associated with, and as it turned out, he found that Antifa, who are violent extremist propaganda site CrimeThink, which was banned on Twitter or X for content instructing people to carry out violent criminal acts, says it received an email from the US Air Force member shortly before he set fire to himself outside the Israeli embassy. The group urges comrades not to kill themselves in despair and instead to join a cell to carry out collective plans. They mention the deceased comrade's pronouns. And as usual with Andy No, he's not lying. Because as we can see from screenshots, the first one, we can actually see that they did get an email signed by Aaron Bushnell saying, "Today I'm planning to engage in extreme, violent act of protest against the genocide of the Palestinian people. Below link should take you to a live stream and recorded footage of the event, which will be highly disturbing. I ask that you make sure the footage is preserved and reported on." You then go to the next image, and the username was Lily and our Kitty. I can't even make jokes about this. This is just absurd. This is so 2024. I'm actually struggling to make jokes on it. And you know, in the video it explains. We already know what he said, and we already know that he burned himself. You really don't need to go into more detail than that. But they go on to say, if your heart is broken by the horrors in Gaza and you are prepared to bear significant consequences to try and stop them, we urge you to do everything in your power to find comrades and make plans collectively. Again, what this means for Antifa is usually just street marches with low-level violence at this point. They seem to have realised they can't really get away with the violence they used to be able to get away with, especially since Bike Lock Man. So all it really means is do protest, wear black. Lay the foundations for a full life of resistance to colonialism and all forms of oppression. You'll notice that they don't say go over and fight for Palestine. Prepare to take risks as your conscience demands, but don't hurry towards self-destruction. We desperately need you alive, at our side, for all that is to come. This is unbelievably cringe. Let's admit that the kind of protest activity that has taken place thus far in the US has not served to compel the US government to compel a halt to the genocide in Gaza. Yeah, they've had two and they've not changed anything. It is an open question that what could accomplish that. Aaron's actions challenge us to answer this question and to answer it differently than he did. We mourn his passing. And yes, everyone is sad that a person has died. The thing is that some people are finding it funnier than others because this has to be the most pointless action he possibly could have taken when it comes to this. Because effectively, he did end his own life for nothing. But that is something we will get into a bit later. For now, I think we should take a quick look at the background of this guy. Because he has an open online profile and was a keen Redditor. So let's see the type of things that someone that does this says. So Bushnell went by AceBush1 on Reddit, and I'm just picking out some of the more openly political statements that he made. So the first I found is this: IKEA is a private corporation. Defrauding it is morally superior to giving it money. For the record, morality shouldn't be considered when making decisions. The law and Reddit's term of service should be. which, just to translate that for you, corporations bad. IKEA, for some reason, IKEA is probably one of the least offensive corporations I can think of, but even with IKEA, just steal from them. It's good, because the whole original post was about sending emails to IKEA saying that you're missing piece of your furniture you're putting together, and if you do it from different accounts over 6 months, you'll end up just with a new piece of furniture for free. And Ace Bush is basically saying, oh, that's a good thing. Oh, but when we're talking about making decisions, don't care about morality, care about the law and Reddit's term of service, when quite clearly, as we saw recently, he really doesn't believe that. Because showing self-immolation to the extent that he did on Twitch is definitely against their terms of service, and he definitely made a purely moral decision there. It was a stupid one, but he still made it. Anyway, point being here, he's quite clearly some sort of communist, completely anti-giving anyone that is providing a good or service money, because it's probably been stolen somewhere. I don't know. Next up, it's the old classic liberals are just fascists, actually. So this is on a post about the Democrats funding a far-right, quote-unquote, Republican candidate, and obviously, as you can see here, someone is speculating that you can fund opposition candidates that you think are easier to beat, to which Ace Bush replies, thus actively promoting fascism to give themselves an excuse to move to the right as well, which, no. To which someone else replies, they're not that smart, you're engaging in conspiracy thinking here. Yes, well, possibly. He's not mentally well, is he? To which Ace Bush replies, it's not about intelligence, it's not about intentionality, it's about systems. What I stated is what's happening, whether there's any intelligent design behind it or not. It's not new, it's a tale as old as liberalism. Scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds, despite the fact that liberalism was born 3 centuries before fascism even came about, and 2 centuries before any sort of communism came about. In other words, this man is really seeming like your classic leftist. Straight out of college, gone straight into the Air Force, and not really had a good life, I'd guess. Or there's been at least some radicalization somewhere, and I have high doubts that it came from the US Air Force. Next up, in reply to someone calling Trump supporters chimpanzees, Ace Bush says, disrespectful to chimpanzees. I'm not being sarcastic. Comparing humans we don't like to non-human animals reinforces human supremacy, which is destroying humans, non-humans, and the entire planet. I don't think I could give you a more meme-worthy Reddit profile of effectively a typical leftist. A typical Rousseauian liberal, if you will, the type that thinks that things were all better before civilization, and civilization is actually what is causing human suffering, and before civilization we were all just really happy people. Which, if that was the case, why would we ever develop civilization? And why, as civilization has been increasing all over the world, has pretty much everyone's lives been improving? And the less we try and enforce civilization, the worse things seem to get. I mean, this is a side topic, but point being, this man is quite clearly completely assimilated with pure leftist thinking, and these are the things he's saying. Rob corporations because they're big and probably stole it. Don't compare people who support Trump to chimpanzees because chimpanzees are probably actually better than them and more human than them. I mean, honestly, he's complaining about dehumanising. He's dehumanising Trump supporters right here. His understanding of politics leaves much to be desired, but the Reddit post that was going around most is this next one. Whiteness erases culture. Conformity to whatever some authority declare to be the culture is not going to somehow stop the creation of cults, but exacerbate the conditions which create them. Right, you're actually agreeing with the comment you're replying to here, so I think you're misunderstanding what culture is. Culture is not conformity. Culture arises spontaneously and intentionally from social interaction, and conformity stifles that process. No, it's the opposite. Culture is literally conformity. It has to be conformity. Culture isn't the... He thinks culture is the absence of conformity. No. Culture is the conformity. What do these people do? What do the majority of them do? What is their day-to-day life? How do they typically go about their day and their life? It is a conformity. It's a conformity that's obviously quite loose, but, take the UK, for example. Typically, you have 2 people to a marriage. Typically, these marriages have kids. Typically, these kids will then go to school at a certain age. They'll typically work 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. They will typically then have weekends off and typically have a Sunday roast, typically go to the pub in an evening, typically enjoy some sort of sport. It's It's all these conformity things. It's all these people typically doing things. That's what a culture is. It's what a certain group typically do. What are their habits, etc., etc. And that is not spontaneous. To an extent, it is intentional. At least he's got that right. But cultures are developed over centuries. Or, ironically, a way to completely change a culture is to have full top-down authoritarianism, like they've done in communist countries. In fact, conforming to an authoritarian prescribed culture as such, I don't know, settler colonial culture requires a sacrifice of ethnic culture and the autonomy that creates it. Well, that's my second example. And this tends to create a negative feedback loop where, lacking culture, members of the in-group seek to fill the void by further conforming to the prescribed culture by shredding their actual cultural heritage and their ability to create it. So we see the link between authoritarianism and culturelessness. Okay, that bit I don't agree with at all. Because his argument is that in anarchy we wouldn't have cults because these people instead will create their own cultures. But the thing is that, well, culture, there's a reason those words sound the same. And that's because an awful lot of cults have their own culture. And yes, an awful lot of them are authoritarian. You can look at absolutely any cult example in history and find that, yes, they do in fact have their own culture. But effectively, again, Ace Bush here is saying, well, if we just lived like we used to before civilization, we'll all be fine, and we'd all have these great cultures, and people would love each other. And the fact of the matter is that no, life was pretty nasty. Life was pretty short. You look at the way a lot of cavemen died that have survived the fossil record. You know, it's not great. They'd be warring with other tribes quite a lot. You know, they'd have culture. Would they have cults? I don't think we have anthropological evidence or even the ability to understand whether they did or not. Point being, though, is that quite clearly Ace Bush sees whiteness as authoritarian and culture destroying because he is a fish that can't understand the water he is swimming in is water. But this is the type of man that he was, one that was racist to white people, hated right-wingers quite clearly, was an anarchist, was an anti-capitalist, and saw anything that wasn't anarcho-communism as pure fascism. He was unironically someone who thought everyone to the right of Mao was a Nazi. So, naturally, there was quite a large reaction to this. Unsurprisingly, there was a vigil for Aaron Bushnell. As you can see from the picture here, it's, you know, people who are quite clearly pro-Palestinian and understanding that, yes, this was a form of protest, so they are carrying on showing their political stripes at his vigil, which is not something I'd do for someone that I knew, or anyone, I think. Although he was overtly political, I think at this point, again, let him rest in peace. I mean, at this point they're saying rest in power. There's a few ones like that we will see. And it is essentially a leftist's mark of a martyr. If you're saying rest in power for someone, they believe someone has died a martyr for their cause of, well, literally any leftist cause, because a pattern that I think all of us have noticed at this point is that, well, all of these leftist movements seem to merge into each other and create this weird chimera of leftism, in that you see Just Stop Oil being pro-Palestine. You see a lot of people at the Chaz, the automated zone in, Seattle, being completely pro-Black Lives Matter. Effectively, all of these leftist movements just pile together, and I think that's part of the reason they keep winning, because they're able to fully support each other, pretty much no questions asked. And I honestly believe it is just down to these people being midwits, essentially, where they are able to quite deliberately rationalise their own position, and because they can rationalise it, they think it's correct, when in reality, no. We've got to get these people into a mindset where, actually, to be rational, you have to be able to criticise your position properly. And that's not what they're doing. When they're rationalising it, they're only saying, oh, well, I believe this because all of these positives. And then they absolutely don't say any negatives about their own position. Which I like to think I do, but if I don't, you know, I've always got the comment section to kick it into me. Anyway, some of the leftists were making some, honestly, memes that do go quite hard here. When leftists actually make simple memes, they are actually pretty good. But I have to say, I do find the imagery of a US Army guy saluting on fire in front of a Palestinian flag to give mixed messages. Is this saying that Palestine are going to burn the US Army to the ground? Or is it the much more obvious thing of Aaron was part of the US military and he's saluting the Palestine flag while burning himself? I mean, that's obviously what they're going for, but out of context, I don't think people would get this. Next up is a pretty simple Free Palestine one. Again, people were making these. This one's a bit more lame. The officer's kind of there for no reason. Who is supposed to be representing Aaron doesn't even look like anything remotely like a US Army guy. It looks more Soviet to me, but not great. But the point I'm trying to get across is that people really felt like this guy, Aaron Bushnell, did something good, when in reality, he didn't do an awful lot. And I am just trying to get the point across that people saw him as a martyr. With graphics like this being the conclusive proof. In loving memory, rest in power, Aaron Bushnell, 1998 to 2024. Oh my lord, he was younger than me. Free Palestine, free Palestine. May your memory live on forever. So I think if someone has done something similar to what Aaron Bushnell did, we should not be celebrating it. I don't think we should be celebrating acts of self-harm like this. I think it's a horrible thing to do. I think it should be seen more as a tragedy than something almost to celebrate and post over free Palestine on. One, because it's not going to help further the cause of Palestine, as I will go into soon. And two, it's absolutely horrible what he did for himself. The man needed help. He shouldn't be celebrated for divulging his mental illness as he did, especially if it ended in such a tragedy. And I think genuinely the worst part about this is from the other side of the leftist reaction here. With 12,000 likes, rest in power is for black people. Black people, oh my god, they have a small b there, have asked time and time again not to use this outside of the community, and every single time you do. For some reason the tweet ends there, but Layla here has also said, you can pay your respects without appropriating, and we also had this discussion not even a week ago, and it isn't like I am saying don't say anything, just don't say that. So despite this man burning himself alive for the cause that everyone agrees is a good cause, on the leftist side of the aisle I mean, obviously I don't think it's for a good cause, that's still not good enough for these people. Even in death you still need to be racially segregated in this way, and black people can still say the N-word, but white people can't, even in death. I mean, that is effectively what is being said here. We still need racial segregation absolutely everywhere, even posthumously. Next up, with a similar criticism with the first, I know you're not saying rest in power for a white man who was in the military, which, again, is something I've not really touched upon, but it is odd that he was in the military, but I'll touch on that at the end. But again, same point being made. We apparently need racial segregation in all forms of life and death. That is what the mind of a leftist says. Why would you want this? Why would you burn yourself alive for people who say this? I don't know. But the man clearly wasn't in sound mind. But you actually get round to actual Muslims, who are the biggest group, who are definitely behind Palestine in pretty much 100% of cases, and they will effectively just say he was a kafir, which effectively just means a non-Muslim. It's a derogatory term from non-Muslim and infidel and outside or whatever. Basically, yes, he may have killed himself for our cause, but I don't care, he didn't believe in Allah. Therefore, anything he does is completely meaningless, which I think is quite a mad thing to say, even if you are very religious. I couldn't imagine saying that about anyone. I don't care. He wasn't a Christian. I just couldn't imagine saying that. It's sad when anyone dies. But another Muslim account decides to go into more detail. Embarrassing behaviour from a Muslim to be making posts like this about a kafir who set himself on fire. This is what happens when your Aqidah is Palestine. For those that don't know, Aqidah basically means creed. Or I think in this context it means the subject you're obsessed with. Making dua for kafir to rest in peace is impermissible. And again, dua is just an act of worship for Muslims. 2, suicide is haram. Okay, at least Muslims get something right. And 3, none of this is worthy of praise. I in fact agree with this. I don't think any of this is worthy of praise, and I think suicide is bad and no one should ever commit it. And obviously people that feel like they do, or should commit suicide, do need help. I mean, obviously, if you're watching this video and you've felt suicidal, please get some help. Like, honestly do. Your life is worth living, trust me. But obviously, I don't agree with the first one. Say rest in peace to whoever's died. We're all God's creatures, after all. But the thing is that, you know, I've said those last 2 things as someone who is on the Israeli side of things tacitly. Again, it's on the other side of Europe. The only reason I keep talking about it is because of issues like this. It's the issues surrounding it that I have to talk about, because effectively my country's parliament has literally decided that what Islamists who are threatening MPs say goes, because, as the Speaker says, he's not going to suffer through another terrorist attack. When, from what I understood, Parliament's position was the terrorists will never win and will never change our way of life. Well, Parliament is literally changing its way of life due to it, so good one there. But that's the point at hand. And this isn't the only example of this, but even pro-Palestine people do not care that Aaron Bushnell did what he did to himself in support of Palestine. They don't care because he's not Muslim. And I can't think of a more humiliating thing than, again, I can't really use the explicitives here because YouTube will get me, but you can self-delete in quite a spectacular fashion and people still won't care, and you won't have made any difference whatsoever. That is a humiliating and frankly embarrassing legacy that you have left at the tender age of 24. So if you happen to have made it this far through the video and you find yourself in a similar mindset to Aaron Bushnell, I really hope that it has been a wake-up call, that actually what you are doing is really, really cringe, and the way you actually get on and have a good life is actually doing productive things for productive ends to effectively help future generations. And guess what? Protesting at climate change conferences and things like that ain't the way to do it. There's nothing productive about that, and it doesn't help anyone. You're just embarrassing yourselves. And also, this is the type of person who you are supporting here. Mohammed Al-Kurd, he is a writer who is currently living in Jerusalem and is vehemently pro-Palestinian. And this is what he said yesterday, shortly before Aaron decided to go to the embassy. You can't peacefully protest, you can't boycott, you can't hunger strike, you can't hijack planes, you can't block traffic, you can't throw Molotovs, you can't self-immolate. Well, I mean, 10 minutes later, apparently you could. You can't heckle politicians, you can't march, you can't riot, you can't dissent, you just can't be. And this has 13,000 likes, and, you know, along with a community note, because obviously it's an absolutely ridiculous thing to say. But this is the type of person you are supporting when you're pro-Palestine. I just can't get behind that. And there are plenty of criticisms that you can put forward to Israel. It's a war. They're obviously going to get things wrong. I have no problem with pointing that out. But when it comes to one side defending itself from what is just a fact a terrorist state, and the other side has literal people lamenting that they can't commit terrorist attacks on the other, I know which side I'd rather be on. And I know for damn sure that I am not going to be self-immolating for either side. I can't even think of anything I would self-immolate for. And yet this is the world we find ourselves in. One where not just one person, but two people have literally set themselves on fire for a completely naive outcome. An outcome that, just quite frankly, would make everyone's lives worse. And as I mentioned before, this was a US Air Force man who, I think if I was to be an armchair psychologist at this point, just say that he was in the Air Force and he felt guilt for being in the Air Force because I think he thought of himself as the oppressor. And to him, that was an awful thing to be. So I think part of the reason that he did what he did was almost as penance for feeling like the oppressor. He feels like that he was an evil person, so he felt like he had to punish himself, and that was it. And he obviously thought while he does it, he makes a spectacle of it, and puts forward his support for a country that's on the other side of the planet to him. And honestly, this type of thing, I think it's actually good to mock. Because one of the big reasons that he did what he did was effectively to make a big public display to say, I'm going to do some good in the world. And if you mock that and say you didn't do anything helpful at all, you just made an idiot out of yourself and ended your life, then obviously you are just going to get rinsed for mocking, which is why we've seen some good memes like this one. This is for Palestine, thumbs up, oh well, no one cared, this isn't good. And I genuinely think memes like this will get people who are on the same path as Aaron was on to rethink what they're going to do, and hopefully realise that what they are supporting is a bad thing and their support means nothing, because then ending themselves in this way will be seen as a bad thing and they won't do it, and, you know, the more we can bring down suicides, the better. And I think mocking people who do it in such a stupid way is a good way to go about it. and then obviously offering help to people who are on the same path as Aaron. Definitely give them help because they need it. But this other meme was good too, one posted by Destiny, just showing that what Aaron did is of absolutely no help to anyone. You know, if you're worried about children dying in Palestine, you have done nothing by literally setting yourself on fire. And if you go look at this yourself, you'll see a load of leftists in the quote tweets and the replies saying, oh, what's he supposed to do? Stop the bullets himself? Yes. Unironically, yes. If he thinks that Palestine is genuinely under attack by a genocidal dictatorship, he should go and join the Palestinian resistance. That is what you should do. That is what people have done in the past. No one is doing it because no one really believes it's a genocide. And if you really think that voting harder, protesting harder, and asking the government, please stop sending money to Israel is going to change that, you're completely wrong. No. If you really believe in this, go do what even the Reddit battalion did with Ukraine. They actually went and fought because they genuinely thought that Putin was an oppressor, but clearly no one in the West really thinks that Israel is an oppressor because no one's going over to actually fight for Palestine who is a Westerner. No, in fact, they're staying here, and as I say, more of them are setting themselves on fire than doing anything actually useful. Perfect meme. Hopefully we'll get the messages into their heads, but from the looks of it, no. They're just going to keep denying it and saying, oh my god, this guy was a great martyr. Unbelievable. Anyway, I thought I'd touch upon this topic because I rarely talk about American politics these days, and this really is an issue that is wider than just America. We are seeing people all over the Western world, but mainly in the UK and America with this subject, who are people that would never go over to Palestine to actually defend Palestinian territory and children. They would rather just stay in the West and try and guilt everyone who either doesn't care or, like me, tacitly supports Israel, because obviously Israel need to crush Hamas, otherwise they're just going to keep getting harassed and suffer from terrorist attacks on the regular. But the thing is that I don't like going on about Israel and Palestine, because as far as I'm aware it's nothing to do with me. I don't care. It's the other side of the Mediterranean. It's over there. It's not to do with British issues, but it's become the British issue. And that does scare me, and does show us that the modern Britain is for some reason all about foreign policy, and yet people will constantly talk about, oh, isn't the NHS terrible? Look at all these domestic issues. But for some reason, as soon as you bring up one of the two foreign issues of Ukraine, Russia, or Gaza, Israel, all of a sudden nothing in Britain matters. And it's just crazy. I'd rather actually talk about these issues in Britain, but no. We've had to have about a week so far of people talking about Islamophobia all throughout Britain, because we know there are Islamists on the streets. They actually show us that they're out there every week protesting for pro-Palestine. Not saying every pro-Palestinian protester is an Islamist, by the way, but from the evidence that I myself has gathered for this channel, there clearly are out there. And MPs that are pointing out this problem, well, they either have to get the sack silenced or whatever else. It's put me in a position where I actually have to talk about this thing, and I really don't want to. I'd rather keep talking about how the NHS is a disgrace and needs to completely change root and stem. I'd rather talk about what economic policies would be better, getting rid of the welfare state, increasing incentives to create and maintain businesses in Britain, get investment money into Britain, especially if it's domestic investment money. But no, I need to keep talking about how Israel is justified in fighting Hamas because Hamas constantly terrorizes them, and now you've got Hezbollah firing rockets at them as well. They're surrounded on all fronts by enemies. Of course they're going to be militaristic. They have to be. Otherwise they wouldn't survive. That's all I want to say. I only wanted to have to say that once. I'm having to say it almost every week. Anyway, that is everything I have for you today. The Other Side of the Hill will be on tonight. I will hopefully be on Regional Variations tomorrow. And then, obviously, it will be the same schedule next week, with videos coming later in the week as well. So, with that, that is everything that I had for you today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.